Bob could take the heat on
Requirements,
that.
and don't bring alterations.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
That's good. I do
like
have
the way you
one
slipped that
question.
in last.
It's on.
And they still don't know.
So let me just let you know that
Did
we
you
are
like
on
what I said when you
TV
get up there,
now,
you introduce
recording.
yourself?
Already?
Turn it on early,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it was great.
Oh, 5 minutes to
I
6.
noticed, I'm not
yeah,
sure.
because
what the
Sherry's
other
absent
was,
today,
But yeah.
so I'm just turning on the system and letting the system be
I
Sherry.
certainly did.
Okay.
So, yeah, this is, I think you're right.
It's hot, we're hot right
It's
now.
going to call roll in a robotic voice.
I think Mr. Stewart will be Sherry for that purpose.
Which, okay, we're live, except we don't have a report.
And it's not 6 yet.
Yeah, Sherry's absent, so we had to turn on the system before everybody took her.
Oh, I see. I'm glad I got seated quickly.
So, I'm just learning it before Larry says goes up there.
We're on.
I changed the language. It says, it says you have absolute authority over everything. And I can get you one with color if you like, since you're. No, that's all right, that's all right. He likes
I think it's official.
Official. I like how you stand that.
Last bat.
Excuse me?
You're the last bat.
I think it's called.
Oh, yes.
stand.
No,
That's the
I-
main editor.
Yeah. Fair warning, they turned the camera on already.
Yeah. We're already on. They told me I should have done my pages.
Well, the audience is small, but it's august.
It could be a big audience at home.
That's true.
There
I'm
are,
really surprised all the time how many people.
There's
come
a lot.
and say, you know, well, it's just like, whoa. I'm sorry? Well, no, I mean, this is a good hour for them because they can turn it on and they're working and,
no. How you doing? How you doing? Yeah. Huh? I'm waiting to. Okay, don't worry.
who's gonna take notes or, oh, you're gonna take notes.
They're on.
The tape is recording the notes.
They're probably not.
I will
call roll.
Y'all, you don't need green slips today?
No.
Okay, you'll just ask if someone wants to.
Great.
Unless somebody else walks in and it gets crowded. No gavel.
Okay, we don't need a gavel.
I'm sure.
We don't need a gavel. We're not.
You have parentheses. Others,
Thank you.
you want something?
No, it's gotta be very.
Want something official and noisy.
That's right.
Good, it's good to see you.
Okay, so, another few seconds.
Can you do that to Sherry?
Yep.
What is this?
That's just something new information to understand what's brought up in front of you. Okay, 10 more seconds.
These are all referenced.
Okay, good evening. I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Mr. Stewart? Would you like to read roll?
Board Member Quillisi,
Here?
Board Member Ulrich,
Present?
Board Member Hanson, Vice Chair Farmer, Chair Daddy.
Here. Mr. Quillisi, will you lead us in the pledge to our country's flag?
Ready? Begin.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, public communication. The public communication items is for members of the public to address the Building Appeals Board on items of city business other than the scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the board and will generally be referred to the staff and/or placed on a subsequent agenda. Under the state law, other than for emergency items, no action on non-agenda items can be taken. And so I would look at the audience and I would ask at this time if either of the people in the audience would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda tonight. Having no one here that wishes to speak, what I would like to do is I would like to go to the consent items. And we have 3 different minutes, February 25, March 11, and April 13th. And I believe that a correction was made on the April 13th. Is that correct, Mr. Clark? Which would be the side setback recommendation from the Building Appeals Board to the City Council.
I think that is correct, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Did everybody see that page?
No.
It's this page here
Page,
in the section.
page 3 of 4 of the minutes
see
and
that?
item number 7.
Okay, does anybody see anything in here? Because we kind of did get a little cross with some of the different pages that we're looking at, the yes and no's. Is this appropriate for me to make a comment on these items at this time, or are we just going to do the consent? Okay, so what I want us to do is look at page 3 of 4. We had 15 items. We asked that one be deleted and collapsed. So now we're down to 14. And what I see is we have a couple of differences, not only with ourselves, but with the Planning Commission. Item 2, Planning Commission suggests a 35% footprint maximum. We went ahead and made a resolution to recommended an increase to 50%. We went ahead and differed on item 4 and made a recommendation that the second unit could exceed the first unit subject to lot coverage. So if we have a very small home, like we do on Eucalyptus, which is 400 or 500 square feet, then they would be able to build a larger home. We differ on item 10. Well, we differ on item 8. Should the city council require the deed restriction? I believe we didn't see deed restrictions as enforceable. We have one of the 8 units that got permitted under the second unit compliance program currently. And that person lives 2 doors away from me but has a home on Daly, and that home is now a second unit compliance, which has been turned into a vacation rental. So I think we kind of decided that we can't run everything down and make everything work, and if you can't enforce, then the codes shouldn't be there that are unenforceable. On item 10, state 1941, 3-1 on that, and they're a no. I don't know what they would like to use instead. The building fees, I want to make sure that we're perfectly at a 3-way split, no and a 2-2. And so that's going to be great, because that's going to be totally a city council recommendation. Yes, Mr. Clark?
So just to interpret this a little bit, the column that's titled BAB is the original results of your survey.
Yep.
And then the column that's titled motion indicates where you ended up. So in some cases, after discussion, you did make a motion and adopt it.
Right, on item 10, for example, the vote was 3-1, but we did pass that.
That's correct.
Well, I would be more interested in item item 11, where the vote was 2-2, and we did pass it. And I'd wonder how we did that with the 2-2.
So again, the original survey that was done by you individually
The survey was
Was-
2-2.
was 2-2.
But the
But
motion
then at the
passed.
meeting, a motion was made and unanimously adopted.
Is there going to be a different type of a format forwarded to council? So they don't
Yes.
see that we're looking at the survey and think that's a recommendation, when the recommendation is one over the right and it's a different recommendation?
Yeah, for the city council, we provided your recommendations based on these motions in a bubble, so they can see on each item what you recommended.
Okay.
And I did circulate that to the group to review and make sure we had it accurate, and as a result of that, we made a couple corrections.
And then item 13, separate utilities. I'm not really sure what the argument was or the question was with the planning commission. And so what I would do is I would ask,
I don't have that agenda item in my packet. Maybe I'll have to
This
have
is,
it.
this is in the April 13th
No,
minutes.
but I don't have it. I don't have what you guys are looking at. It's not- I have the other minutes, but not that one.
Oh,
would you like to look at this before we go ahead and ask for an approval of minutes? Okay, well, I'm going to ask if we have anybody here that has further questions, or if I can get a motion to accept the minutes for the last three Building Appeals Board meetings, February 25, March 11, and April 13th.
I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as approved.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, are you handling roll call?
Yes.
Or should we just do this by a yay or nay vote? All those in favor say aye.
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 limited I can only vote on the April minutes. I was not a member before that.
And I haven't started yet.
Bob?
Well, that's a hell of a dilemma. So should we come back to February and start and just, we're gonna do these one at a time then?
I think that would be good.
I can't really vote on this because of my position.
No, you were here and you witnessed the meeting. What you're voting on is whether or not these minutes are accurate for the meeting.
That's correct.
And they're accurate, as far as I can determine, because we went over, I
Right.
reviewed all of the tapes again, and we made all corrections and had a discussion. So, again, where are we? I called for a motion, I got a motion and a second, and I've asked for a vote.
I think, Chair Daddy, what you could do is just take them each separately.
Okay.
And then you could hold off on the minutes that we just gave Member Hanson, so she'd have time to review them, and then bring that back later up in the meeting.
How about if we do this? How about if we go to the first discussion item? Give her time, because we really should move this along. This is not this complicated tonight, okay? I have a person in the audience that came in. We had a time for open discussion. If there were items that were not on the agenda, if you would like to step up and speak on these?
No, thank you.
Okay, I want to make sure that everybody gets heard. That's the primary thing that I want to do. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the discussion item 1. Let me get this out of the way. And discussion item 1 is going to be the Building Appeal Board. It's going to be from Stephen Stewart, CBO Building Official. And this is going to be the Municipal Code Ordinance Text Amendment, TA 15-05, to modify the municipal code relating to expedited permitting procedure for small residential rooftop solar systems. Would you like to give a brief explanation, Mr. Stewart, and then we can go to the audience and ask for some discussion on the item? I'll let you start it off so we're
I'd be happy to.
understanding the gist.
Chair and members of the board, before you have a recommendation to the city council to adopt a modification to the municipal code dealing with photovoltaic streamlining process. Section 65850.5A of the California Government Code, recently adopted by the state, requires local municipalities to develop a ordinance for expediting and streamlining permit processes for small residential rooftop energy systems. The city, for last several years, has been able to expedite these types of systems within usually a 24-hour process during business hours. So if something comes in on a Friday, of course, it wouldn't be processed till Monday. So in that regard, we've been able to expedite those, assuming there's no particular issues with the electrical switchgear or some other correction that may come up during the plan review process. With that being said, the state law still requires us to adopt a ordinance to essentially make sure that we are expediting these types of processes. The sample ordinance you have before you is actually a draft prepared by the California Building Officials, which is a statewide organization, which all the building officials in the state, or the majority of them, all participate in. And so this is a similar language that I would anticipate that most cities will be adopting, with maybe some minor variations. Part of the requirement is to develop a checklist for expediting the plan review process. And in the attachment D, called the California Solar Permitting Guidelines, there is a checklist in that document over on page 25, which my associate, who does the majority of the plan review for photovoltaic systems, our deputy building official, Larry Beam, actually is using this for review right now. And so we will probably make some adjustments to this to make it a little clearer here or there, but in essence, we'll be using this checklist for the processing of that. What's happening on the state level is there is underway a group made up of photovoltaic providers and building officials and other interested parties to develop a standard plan for these systems. And some of you may be familiar with the standard plan for metal patio covers, where they're pre-approved. They walk in with a site plan. We do a zoning clearance on there, but all the structural provisions are already there, and it's an easy permit process for us. So I anticipate over the next year or so that we'll probably have something of that type that will be able to even expedite these even more. The technology of photovoltaic systems is dramatically changed over the last several years, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon as far as improvements with equipment and electrical grounding and the approach of installation and making it a lot simpler. When they originally came out, it required building departments to sometimes go out 2 or 3 times to do an inspection. As you can see in the proposed regulations, we're looking at 1 inspection because of the standardization of the roof racking system in connection to the roof, the quick snap inverters that have been developed. All of this has helped streamline the overall process, and I think that will continue over the next several years. Unfortunately, Larry was out sick today. I was going to have him here tonight if you had any technical questions, but I will try to answer any questions that you may have in that regard.
With that, before I open to the panel for discussion, we have someone in the audience that is very familiar, well-versed, and I would like to have them go ahead and shed a little light on this, and then we can get into all the little technicalities that will be there. So, would you like to stand up to the mic and tell everybody who you are?
Thank you. My name is Wayne Pendry, and I am a licensed general contractor since 1993. I have been in the solar industry since 2007. I've worked at multiple levels. My last 4 years, I was an instructor at the Center for Employment Training where I taught solar installation. I was also an authorized instructor out at Solar World in Camarillo before they moved their location up to Oregon. Solar World had a really great training format because they were leasing solar programs that they were obligated to for 20 years for the lease because they owned them. And so they gave us the training of the top 10 list, things to check on. And this is where these are professional companies out there installing what we're catching them on regularly over and over again. I agree with the information that Stephen just shared. The technology has been standardized. Unfortunately, as good as the equipment is, it still comes down to the end installer who's putting it on the roof. And so there does need to be an inspection. I'm a really big advocate for safety. But at the same time, the prices have come down. The systems have been standardized. They are a lot more understandable, a lot safer. As long as the equipment is all UL listed and they're not bringing in imported equipment that doesn't have those requirements, you're pretty safe on the equipment side. It just comes down to workmanship and having somebody who's just going to take the time to open that box, look in there, make sure they're using the right wiring, the right connections, the right sizing. And so it comes down to safety. On the other hand, I understand that this is a lot of technical information. I kind of briefed through a lot of it. I'm willing to extend myself if I can be of any value to the board to kind of decipher through the information to help it make it more understandable, if that's any help.
I would appreciate that, and I do have some technical questions, and I'm going to throw it open to the board. We have a 30 therm, and I'm going to make an assumption, which I don't like to do, and that's for hot and cold. That's for radiant heat. That's for
I understand.
that's going to be for hot water system, and it shows that same size. Then it shows a 10 kilowatt, and I was just wondering on a 10 kilowatt. What would be the square footage coverage on a roof for 10 kilowatt? I know they have the film, and I know they got better ones, but what are we kind of looking at when it says small?
We always use the rule of thumb of 10 square feet per kilowatt. So you're looking at 100 square feet,
So that's 100 square feet?
10 by 10 area.
10 by 10 area.
Count.
Again, it comes down to what equipment they're using. The array has to be put on the roof so that we have the clearances for the fire department. You have to have a 3-foot setback along your ridge. You have to have a 3-foot walkway down the side. You have to have 3 foot in your valleys. So when you lose all these setbacks and you narrow the area down and you figure out what you have left.
You have 100 feet.
Yes, there you go. So we're working with those parameters. Then you have your shade issues. You really have to understand shading. I have 2 70-foot palm trees. By the way, I have a solar system on my roof. My bill was $40 negative after a year. I designed the system myself. And knew to go with in-phase inverters, microinverters, because of the shade issues to accommodate those things. But really understanding how this equipment works and accommodating those issues. We have a lot of trees in Ojai, comparatively speaking to the rest of the county. I've done a lot of solar walking on roofs over the years, and it's been the biggest challenge that people can't see the solar for the trees.
What angle? When I take a look at Patagonia there at due south, they run a due south on that overhead parking. And so what they've done is they've made all their overhead parking solar units.
Yes.
And they're buying a big lot next to them, and they're going to do the same thing, and they're going to really expand. If we were going to install, what due south, is that what we want? We want a due south exposure?
This is optimization of the equipment, getting the best value out of it, because, for example, I have a 4 kW system on my roof, 4,000 watts. But in a day, it generates for 5.5 hours because it's fixed and doesn't move, doesn't have a tracking system. So 5.5 times that 4,000 is what my daily generation would be. Now, if I move away from south, the efficiency drops off by percentages. We go down about 90% when we go west, we go about 80% when we go east. A lot of people believe you can't go north. That's a bit of a fallacy. You can go north on fairly flat elevations and still get really relevantly decent production. You just have to use more panels to make up for the loss of efficiency. So there's a lot of understanding of how the systems work. These are shade studies. It's all a calculation. The tools are online. You plug the numbers in. It tells you what the annual production is going to be.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Quillisi, you want to start?
I have a question.
Sure.
Can I have a question?
Mr. Wyrick.
Close the public hearing? Okay, just question, just so I understand, because I don't know as much as you do.
That's right.
But 5A and 5B of attachment A, it's interesting. On the application, the applicant is to, the applicant shall verify to the applicant's reasonable satisfaction through the use of standard engineering evaluation techniques that the support structure for the small residential is stable with respect to all wind, seismic, etc. And then B has to do with the electrical, which is where the applicant is performing these evaluations and then submitting the evaluation to the building official, is my understanding, if that's correct. And then the building official reviews the evaluation done by the applicant, as I'm reading this. And the question I have is the building official, what standard does the building official apply to evaluating, for example, the seismic loads or the electrical adequacy? Is that a particular code standard? I mean, because that's all over the place. Seismic standards have changed dramatically over the years. Electrical codes have changed dramatically over the years. How does that work in terms of what standard the building official applies to determining adequacy on the applicant's submitted information?
And that's a question I have here, which is on your question, and I'll ask Mr. Stewart, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Quillisi. What I put down, and I'm a little interested in, I think I understand how it should work, but I only see that applicable if we have an owner-builder. So if I'm the owner-builder, I'm going to make the determination. I'm going to come in. I am qualified and I have wired nuclear submarines, so I can do one of these panels, but I'm not licensed. And all electrical connections above 24 volts require an inspection, and they require, I believe, a contractor. So I guess the question is there any part in the owner build portion of somebody getting up on the roof and pounding in whatever they're going to do, as long as they stick within the guidelines? And then if we're going to look at that, I want to look at number.
And more than that, I mean, for example, I think current codes require isolated neutrals, and a lot of older buildings don't have isolated neutrals. What kind of upgrades, what standard in other words, does the homeowner be faced with under this expedited process? That's the kind of thing I'm asking. Kind of a technical question, but anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Wyrick. You've brought up a point that's, I think, a part of a bigger question, and that is, how can an applicant reasonably determine that they have something that is approvable before they walk in and ask for a permit?
Right.
And it's that, it's the engineering techniques, it is what's on the checklist. The checklist that's here in AB 2188, for example, it says utility interactive and without battery storage. Why no battery storage? But as in terms of the construction and the rest of it, I don't think that any homeowner is in a position to determine to any reasonable satisfaction that what their contractor is going to do is going to be acceptable unless there is something in the checklist that says, here's what the contractor has to do for this to be a permittable installation. And I may be wrong, but I think we need to give the public a sense that they can be confident in asking for a permit. They've got enough things to look at and ask their potential contractor about so that they don't have the risk of a tail chase with requirements that they didn't understand or the contractor didn't understand. And I'd like to see all of that in the checklist before we pass this on to the city council for approval. Thank you.
Mr. Farmer? You have any?
I have a question, and maybe you can help me understand. Attachment A, 2 of 4, item number 6, and I'll just read it.
Oh, attachment A.
It says, for a small residential rooftop solar energy system eligible for expedited review, only one inspection shall be required, which shall be done in a timely manner and may include a consolidated inspection by the building official. If a small residential rooftop solar energy system fails inspection, a subsequent inspection is authorized. However, the subsequent inspection need not conform to the requirements of this subsection. Maybe you can help me understand that, Stephen?
Sure. So would you like me to hit all of these questions we had, or you want me to answer this one and I'll backtrack? Or?
No, I think what I'd kind of like to do is I want to backtrack because I want to
Okay.
make sure we get into this thing, because what I think is going to happen is we're going to see that we have some things in here that maybe are contradictory and maybe are very confusing. And I think what we're going to discover is that by putting a couple of things in here, such as a licensed general contractor or a licensed whatever contractor is able to determine, not the guy that works at the grocery store like I did for a number of years. And again, if somebody's going to go ahead and turn this thing in, what I kind of asked before is the owner builder. It appears to me that it's really necessary to have somebody that is a professional that does the installation.
Let me speak to that.
Sure.
99% of all the systems we see are submitted by a licensed contractor who has licensing to install photovoltaic systems. On occasion, an owner builder who is a journeyman level electrician has made application to install their own. Under the electrical code, the building official can accept that if they're a state certified electrician to do their own work. That's no different than them putting on a brand new electrical service panel on their house. So, but for all intents and purposes, it's 99% of them are all licensed contractors. When it makes reference in the ordinance to the applicant, we're talking about the individual who's making application for the photovoltaic system. Under state statute, owner builder can make application, or a licensed contractor can make application. So in essence, what that is making reference to is the licensed contractor who's making application for a permit to do the installation. In regards to the standards that we use, it's basically the California Electric Code and the California Building Code for seismic design standards. And what this is really making reference to is if we get involved in a rack system other than just a roof-mounted connection system, then we would have to look at this seismic design. But the majority of all the applications that come in the door are all pre-engineered by a engineer, and it's designed in that light. So that kind of, I think, answers some of the questions. In regards to the inspection process, what happened early on was that a lot of building departments, because this was a significant learning curve, we're requiring multiple inspections for installation of photovoltaic systems. So the inspection would be called for the racking system before they put the panels and wired them up. And so that stopped the construction process. So they'd have to wait for an inspection. Inspection would have to go out, sign it off, and then they'd have to send another crew out there to then install the panels. And in some cases, the installation of the panels before they could hook it up to the electrical system had to be inspected. So what the state law is intending, I believe, is to help expedite this, to keep the cost of the units down and to expedite the inspection process. We've always been comfortable with licensed contractors with the simple racking system to only require one inspection. What happens, though, from time to time is that when we get out there, the electrical service panel is not quite what they've indicated on their plans. So, for instance, it may be undersized, or it may not have adequate open circuit breakers in there to be able to accommodate that. And so that's part of what our inspection is all about, is to go out there and make sure it's safe from an electrical standpoint. And in some cases, go ahead.
Can I stop you right there, Mr.
Absolutely.
Stewart? You and I have had a number of discussions on this. Aside from this, I know this is somebody else's checklist because we're supposed to put our picture on the front of it. It says, put your picture here and use it. Would you feel comfortable modifying this
Oh, absolutely.
to the
And-
point where it now says that this process is not eligible or applicable for those units, for all units under a minimum of 100 amps, just so we can get that taken care of immediately?
You know, absolutely. And that's part of our review process. Like I said in my staff report, this is a guideline. It's left up to the city to modify this checklist. I intend to do that. We're under some tight timeframes to get this adopted by state statute, but if the board would like to have staff work on the checklist and bring that back to you, be happy to. I just would like to try to keep the ordinance moving forward so that we adopt it in a timely manner, that we're in compliance with state law.
Before September 15th, and
Yeah,
I
but
understand.
I mean, this, you guys are getting the first look at this. This hasn't gone to the city attorney yet for his review, and then the council will have to have a hearing, and then there will be a 30-day time frame before it becomes law, because this is an ordinance. So even though September seems like a long ways off, we really have to move forward on this in an expedited manner. But as you can see, in the ordinance, it gives the building official the authority to develop the checklist, and I would be more than happy to bring it back and get the Contractors Association involved in this as well, to give us some help on this.
Well, again, if we do it right, we make it easy, and we put everything down. It's, I don't want somebody to have a expectation that, hey, they're going to do this, it's a 10 by 10, they already checked out the price at Walmart, they know what's going on, they got an electrician down the corner, and we go, you got a 60 amp service, or you got a 75 amp service, or somebody have an underside service.
It won't work, because
but-
the system,
But what I want to do is I want to tell them right up front, even before they start, and then that way, if it's there, it's clear, it's on the checklist that, listen, this is not available for under 100 amp. It's also not available, and you and I have discussed, certain things that are going on in here. We don't want fuses, you got fuse. It would just.
the
if we
larger
could add a little
systems,
bit
even
more.
100 amp is not adequate. It's probably 200 amp for.
Well,
Would you come on up to the mic? It's not for us, but if you don't speak into the mic, they can't hear you at
I
home.
understand. No, 200 amp, you're correct, is the minimum with the 2 circuits that we have to put in there. And this is one of the most common things. I happen to know that I was just taking an NEC class under Vince Tobey down in Ventura, and it's just his pet peeve. He catches solar companies regularly trying to squeeze these into systems. And I'm going to mention something about my own company. I didn't come here to speak about my own company, but you should keep this perspective. In my company, it's a standard. We include the price of a panel upgrade in every solar installation. If they don't need it, we deduct it out of the price. So don't exempt the 100 amp people, is my point. They can get it, but they have to do the panel upgrade.
Well, in that case, then, if that's your expert technical opinion, and I take it as that, then it ought to be in the checklist that the homeowner should ensure that there is a 200 amp main panel at the house before beginning installation. And I think the checklist might even come in 2 parts. One, things the homeowner can determine for himself or herself, and things that the homeowner should ask of the contractor to be sure that the proper foundation is in place for the installation of the solar system.
Sure.
I mean, we want to get as many of these things done.
Yes,
If you read the paper
absolutely.
the other day, our electrical generation is way, way, way down because of the drought. They don't have the water to push the impellers. So, you know, we need to move this thing along, and we need to get it going. We want to make it easy. But what I want to do is I only want to have one checklist. I want to have everything on the checklist. I want everybody to look at it, and they go to item 5, and they go, I can't do that. Fine.
Sure.
Then they haven't had you out and us out and this out and appeal out, and they're never going to get it done.
Yes.
And it gets more people in, and I just don't want to see disgruntled people.
You're
so.
absolutely right. And Stephen, I was one of the 1%ers. I installed a solar system on my roof, and mind you, I'm not a solar company. And I submitted my paperwork. I got my inspection immediately. You know, the inspector had no problem with it, but Edison wrote me a letter and realized I was not a solar company. And they sent somebody all the way from Long Beach to come look at my system because they wanted to know what I did. They got really concerned. So when it's not installed by a licensed inspector, Edison does get concerned.
Okay. Dale?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Wayne, what's the average price of one of these systems?
Great question.
A 10 kilowatt system.
10 kilowatt
Yeah, the ones that
system.
we're talking about here. What's the
Now,
average
you got, bear with me because I can talk on multiple levels here, but the standard installation from an individual sale homeowner by homeowner is going between $4 and $5 a watt. So 10 kilowatts, 10,000 watts is $40,000 to $50,000 install, but then you're getting 30% tax credits back on that amount. The community solar programs like the Solarize Ojai, Solarize Ventura, and that's happened to be what I do in my job. I do community solar for the state of California for my company. We come in at about 360, 350. Sometimes we're able to get down to 330 a watt, depending on the volume of the community, how many projects we're doing. This is a project where the community gets involved, and we do a big program like
Make a
this.
bulk buy, you mean?
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's why I said depends on where you're at on the pricing.
But there's still a 30%
30%
state
tax
subsidy on whatever the bill is.
If they're
No, it's-
buying it.
That's a credit now.
Credit.
If they're leasing it.
Credit against
Yeah,
your
it's
income
different.
taxes?
Yeah, credit against the
Okay.
bottom line.
Okay.
Not a deduction, but a credit.
Yes, exactly.
better.
Tax credit, dollar for dollar.
It's way bigger, way
Yeah.
bigger amount of money on that one. Okay, so let's get back, and Mr. Ulrich, you have any questions on this?
The only comment I'd make is, so far I've counted.
Your mic?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So far I've counted 6 references to the checklist, and exclusive of the checklist itself. So I think not only is the orientation of the Assembly bill, but the orientation of the city of Ojai in adopting an ordinance should be to make it as transparent and as simple to access qualifying criteria to a potential applicant.
Yeah.
And also, for the benefit of the staff processing the application, having a checklist to run down is a benefit, I would think. So I would just simply make note that more checklists, better.
Thank you. Dale?
Yes,
Any more
I wanted
questions?
to ask Mr. Stewart, what's the approximate, I mean, it was a two-pronged thing. We're supposed to make a checklist to make it easy, and the other thing is to keep the permitting fee down. Do you have an approximate idea of what the permitting fee would cost?
The city ordinance limits the cost of photovoltaic systems to $500, and then there's actually a discount for certain types of organizations that reduces that even more.
$500 for the permit? Seems high to me. Am I wrong?
I thought the permit fees were generally structured to reflect the cost to the city of the processing and
What
the
it costs.
inspections and whatever.
That's correct.
And,
So you have
and
the plan review process, and then the inspection process. And the permit processing, and if you add all of that up, it's right at $500 for the larger systems and subsequent less for the smaller systems.
okay.
Okay, with that, I'm gonna add a couple myself, because I went ahead and got this great orange highlighter here and highlighted the heck out of all this stuff. We had prior discussion. We didn't have prior discussion. The council has had a number of discussions. The planning commission has had a number of other discussions. And it had to do with a fairly new phrase for me called solar shed, where there were discussions. And I know that the planning commission got into technically complicated, and I don't know what the final determination was. I don't know if they forwarded it to the council. I don't know if the council, in fact, gave permission. But what they proposed was that the solar, depending on the roof configuration, be allowed to extend past the 25-foot maximum height, which has just been newly adopted. And so what I'd kind of like to make sure before we do this, and again, we want to do it as soon as possible. We want to help you. We want to give as many ideas. But I think it would be important to go ahead and vet that thing out and figure that, we're kind of in the same ball game on there. I don't know how often that's going to happen, but they were asking for a mechanism when it made sense to be able to do that. So under no circumstances, even in the old days, could you go over 30 feet. But what they're doing is they're looking at a couple of feet difference, maybe because of the pitch of the roof, because of some of the other unique construction, where they actually needed to get that, as Mr. Pendry said, shade. And so where you have a turret, you've got towers, you've got chimneys, you have things that are going to be a solid obstruction. They were asking for a way, and I'm not saying I'm recommending this. What I'm saying is I don't remember what the final decision on that was, or even if there was a final decision. So I'd like to make sure that we at least vet that out, and that is something that we could look and see if that needs to go on the checklist.
We could sure incorporate that into the checklist. But for the most part, under state statute, cities are very limited to regulate for zoning purposes the installation of photovoltaic systems. So in these particular applications we're dealing with, they would be very limited to do anything about the installation of that. Now, when it gets into racking systems, where it gets into carport systems or something of that nature, then yes, zoning regulations could kick in. But for standardized systems that we're talking about, it's very limited what they can get involved in.
You mean a homeowner could put in a solar panel system that extends to 35 feet above the ground on a single-family residence, and the city could not control that?
That would be on a racking system, and then there's controls on that. But a roof-mounted system where it's installed at the plane of the roof, there's very limited provisions under state statute that can be regulated by the city.
Mr. Quincy, I would put this different. If you had somebody that already had a 30-foot roof height, would they then be eliminated from adding another couple of foot structure on top? Because our new standard is 25.
But it's basically 6 to 8 inches, probably panel height off a roof.
Yeah, we try to get air cooling underneath it for optimization because the heat is not your friend with solar, so they want that extension of 6 inches. But keep in mind, the 3-foot setback from the ridge,
Yeah.
the fire department requirement, so if the house is at 30 feet, the solar's only gonna go to 27.
Right. So unless there's some major racking system installed, then the city could regulate that. But if it's a typical roof-mounted system on the roof with the plane of the roof, with the setbacks, there's very limited ability zoning-wise for the city to regulate that.
Okay.
What was happening across the state, homeowners associations were saying, no, you can't install these. And so the state basically.
Not pretty.
Because they're not pretty or not this or not that. The state basically said, we're passing a law that says you don't have any authority to regulate that.
Okay, do we have any other questions that,
I have a
Mr. Ulrich?
Senate Bill 1222, which was enacted on September 27th, 2012, set a limit for residential solar energy system permitting. The law further provides specific limits on the dollar amount local governments may charge for a permit. Residential solar energy systems, $500 plus $15 for every kilowatt over 15.
Okay.
That's a maximum limit. So if the city's, another perhaps salient point is the average permit fee in the city of San Jose, which is, I believe, the second largest or third largest city in the state, averages $310. And that may involve 3 different plan checks, however, electrical, plumbing, and a general building, according to their system. So, and that only applies to roof-mounted systems, not ground-mounted systems. So,
What you meant by a racking system, a ground-mounted system?
But we're in compliance
Yeah.
with that state law.
yeah. So,
And we're only talking about roof with this,
correct.
limited to 10, so we wouldn't have
Right.
anything going over the 15, so there'd be no additional charge.
But because that's maxed out.
Correct.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Okay.
Dale, any other questions? Anybody, this is the time, let's do it. Mr. Pendry?
I was curious why the limit at 10, was this equation came up from somewhere?
That's Sacramento.
Oh,
That's in the text of Assembly Bill 2188. And it's not a, from what I read of the bill, which is part of the backup that was available on the city website, this is only saying if it's smaller, if it's 10 kilowatts or smaller, the city must have a process for expedited permitting.
I see.
It doesn't prevent expedited permitting of larger systems. In fact, it doesn't speak to larger systems.
Okay.
Is that correct,
understand now.
Mr. Stewart?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And then there's no maximum of $500, because again, that falls within just this small roof. Sure. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Quillisi?
Thank you. I have some administrative suggestions. My sense is that we're not going to pass this tonight, but we're going to work on it at the next meeting with the checklist in hand as well.
What I would prefer is that you make a recommendation to move the ordinance portion onto the council, and then with the proviso that I will bring back the checklist for consideration by the board before we implement the program.
And separately recommend a checklist to the council?
No. The way the ordinance reads is the checklist is basically up to the building official to prepare under the ordinance, and what I am recommending you do is allow us to work on this checklist. We'll bring it back to you as the building official, back to the Building Board of Appeals, for your consideration before I institute that checklist. But to keep the ordinance moving forward now so that we meet all our timeframes.
Okay, I understand that. Going back, no, I'm not through, sorry.
No, take your time.
Paragraph 2 of what I presume is section 1 says, adopt an ordinance that creates an expedited, streamlined permitting process. Do we have such a process? Is there something in writing, or is paragraph 5 and forward, is that 5 through 8, does that describe the process?
That's correct. What you see here is the actual process, that we're going to only make one inspection rather than multiple inspections, that we are going to accept electronic processing, and we're going to expedite that as quickly as we possibly can through the system.
Okay, well, all right. Then what we're really saying here is that paragraphs 5 through 8 of this suggested ordinance actually describe the process.
That's correct.
And the checklist, which is called for in paragraph 3, is TBD at this point.
That's correct. You're basically leaving up to the building official's discretion, and I commit to you that I will bring that back to you for review.
Okay? Just one last item, I think. I do have an administrative thing about the numbering of the paragraphs in the recommended ordinance. I'm curious why paragraphs 2 and 3 of the recommended ordinance are there insofar as, well, at least paragraph 2 is up in the whereases before we start putting the ordinance in. And I would ask maybe the city manager, in lieu of the city attorney, is this a normal thing to put state requirements on the city into an ordinance?
It's very unnormal that the state would get involved in how the city takes care of its inspection process. So what we're using is just the recommended language from the California building officials for that. Of course, this will be under the purview of the city attorney, and if he feels that the resolution language is adequate, he could recommend that we pull that out. But it's more ministerial than technical, I believe.
Okay. Then my last.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Just to add to that, typically what I've seen in the ordinance is a statement that the above recitals are true and correct. So it may be that when the city attorney reviews this, he will want to put something like that in. I don't know.
Okay, the recitals are the whereases.
So the recitals are the whereases, and then usually there's a section that actually is a now therefore finding that those recitals are true and correct.
Okay.
For format purposes.
What I would have expected when I read through this would be to say that paragraph 2, if it could say, in conformance with section 65850.5 of the Government Code, this ordinance establishes or creates an expedited, streamlined permitting process, so on, as described in subsections 5 through 8 of this ordinance, or if things are renumbered, then change that. And paragraph 3, developing the process, you do a checklist, and the checklist, I presume, then is not part of the ordinance, but is a supplement like any of our planning guidelines for second units and that sort of thing. That kind of language would make me more comfortable. And then lastly, at the very end of this thing, page 3 of 4 names sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think they should be 2, 3, 4, and 5, and section 1 actually begins on page 1, immediately, there should be a title in there immediately before paragraph A, section 9-1.216 added, or somewhere up there in the front.
So
Is that right?
my recommendation is that you include in your motion that those items be referred to the city attorney for review,
Okay?
because it really would be his expertise in terms of how it's worded.
Okay. I'm done. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Please don't leave for just a second.
All right.
Why don't you step up to the mic? Sure. I'll ask this question and have everybody ask theirs so you can leave, okay? I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very, very much.
Sure.
for what
I
you
just have a
do.
dinner meeting with my daughter here in Ohio.
Make it very short. We were been bantering around sizes and numbers and all that stuff. With the 10 kW, what can a person expect to save in electric? I know you said that you had yours, but
10
my-
kW is a fair-sized system. You'd have to be a fairly big user. Well, let me give you an example. My home, which, mind you, is just me and my wife, Deborah Pendry, who most of you might know runs the Ohio Valley Green Coalition. We have a 4 kW system, and I'm negative $40 at the end of the year. So a 10 kW is 2.5 times that much.
run
It
a
comes-
pool pump?
Well, now pumps are probably your biggest single load. And in fact, when I do solar systems for people, I usually
That
don't
and air
expect to
conditioners,
offset
yeah.
the pump loads. I usually try to keep those separately. Particularly when I have done battery backup systems, we exclude pump loads and air conditioning systems.
So a probable expectation of 10 years.
Oh, it,
I mean,
based on the
with
cost
the
of
tax credit
electricity
and the cost
and
of
the tax
electricity?
credits, my personal return on investment was 7.5 years.
7.5.
But
Okay.
at 10 years is a very good expected rate of return based on current electric cost. And again, that's based on saying the electric costs were fixed,
They're not.
which they're not.
Yeah. And you said, you made reference earlier to a company in Camarillo that was putting in systems that they were leasing for 20 years. So what's the real expected lifetime of a solar panel system?
Oh, well, that's a great question. They really don't know. The panels they put in the 70s, back when the first wave of solar got all excited and everything else, are still working today. They lose about 0.25% efficiency per year or 1% every 4 years. So they get a little bit lower and lower in their voltage output, but they're still working. Even NASA's been amazed at their own satellites and how long they keep on working out there. They expected those satellites to die years ago. The solar panels just keep on working. So it's an unknown question, but they're guaranteeing. We used to, when I first got into the business, the warranties were 10 years. Then they bumped them to 20 because everybody got more confidence. Now they're at 25. There's talk about the industry pushing that out to 30 because they're getting more confidence in the product.
Better data.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank-
I'm
Go ahead,
sorry,
Mark.
Wayne, are there programs available now for financing?
Very much so. There's financing options where, and depending on people's credit rating, the financing options can be the same dollar amount as their monthly electric bill. So it comes down to a decision: who do you want to give your money to? And then there's lease options for people who don't have the means to finance it. My neighbor, he's retired. He's a retired welder on a fixed income. The lease makes sense for him. He's going to see a 20% reduction in cost of his electricity. That's cash in his pocket every month. So for him, that makes sense. It's, that's why we're, I'm getting on my own company, we're financial agnostic. Meaning we don't really care how people want to do it. We believe they should do it whatever makes most sense for them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thanks, Wayne.
For your help.
Anytime.
Okay. Any other questions? Do we have any issues? There was one thing I did want to remind us all of, is that Ojai adopted the HERO program, and the HERO program has financing for all of the people within the community. The county, if the people are actually in the county, I talked to Supervisor Bennett on this the other day, they have another program. Shame on me for not actually remembering what it is. We did look it up because all my staff live in the county, but they looked it up and it's very similar.
It's
Clark.
called Empower.
Empower. So if you're not actually in the city limits, it's called Empower, and they have, In the city limits, they can use either Hero or Empower. That's great.
And we actually give them a reduction on their permit costs.
Okay, that's great. So I guess what I need to do is I need to turn it over to the panel here and find out what your pleasure is on this particular item. Mr. Quillisi, comments?
I think I've had all my questions answered. I don't think we have the full text of an amendment that I'd be really comfortable voting for, but my questions have been answered, and it's TBD as to what the final language looks like.
Mr. Farmer?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with adopting the ordinance.
Mr. Ulrich? How about getting up to the mic?
I'm not familiar enough with it at this point to vote.
Okay. Dale?
I'm certainly in favor of moving forward with the ordinance, as you said. Are you going to come up with a checklist for us to look at?
That would be my recommendation.
Okay, yes, I would like that, because I'm certainly not qualified to get into this in depth, but I would like to see a checklist that I think that would make it easy for residents to understand how to go about it, yeah.
Okay, Dale, would you expand on your answer? Are you saying you're comfortable voting now with no changes, no adoption, as it is, and no checklist, and vote to move it on now? Is that what you said? I'm just
Well,
want to be accurate.
if Mr. Stewart's going to develop a checklist for us to look at and question and go over and understand, I just need to understand it all a lot better. I think Wayne's explanation was very helpful. I have a better understanding of it, but I'm willing to vote on going forward with the ordinance. I think we have to do that.
And for point of clarity, voting on this tonight has nothing to do with including the ordinance. And when the ordinance comes back in whatever form it's actually in, we're going to look at it, but we're not going to vote on that. Those two things are not linked together. Is that correct?
Yeah, my recommendation is that you're basically accepting or recommending the ordinance to the city council with the proviso that the city attorney will make the appropriate adjustments in there from a technical standpoint of the reading of the ordinance, and that you direct me, the building official, to develop a checklist based on the checklist that you have here with whatever amendments I, as the building official, or it's really Larry, my associate, recommend. We bring that back to you for discussion, and before we implement that, this board will recommend to the building official the use of that checklist.
So I think you said you'd like us to recommend this document as it's written, or with any modifications we want to include in such a motion, and recommend that to the city council prior to seeing a checklist,
That's correct.
And a modification.
and the modifications to the text.
I have a problem with this process. We got this, I got my packet on Friday, Saturday. It was in the mail Friday. So this is worthy of a little bit of research, and I frankly didn't have time, and I doubt anyone else really had time to do that, with the exception perhaps of Mr. Quillisi, who reads a lot better than I do. Number one. Number two, it's not complete. So it's kind of like, meaning no disrespect, it's like vote on this, it's a lick and a promise. It's not how city business should be conducted. So I'm saying from this perspective, I don't want to say no. I will vote that way, but I want to say at this point, I haven't had enough time to review this. It's a more complicated document, a heck of a lot more complicated document than the administrative report we have on our vacant property, security and registration. So from my perspective, it's not a huge thing, because obviously a relatively small segment of the population will be involved with this process and the potentiality of installing a solar system. By the same token, that could be a lot larger than I'm aware of, simply because I haven't had time to study it.
And no matter what size, no matter what percentage of the population, it ought to be done right.
Exactly.
I'd like someone on the board to present a motion. Do I have anyone here that will present a motion? Mr. Quillisi?
I move that the board work with Mr. Stewart to include various potential language changes and the inclusion as a separate document of a checklist, all subject, obviously, to the city attorney's review, and that we vote on a recommendation to the city council at our next meeting, not more than 4 weeks from tonight.
So that'll make it like June 18th or
That's a
something.
motion.
That's my
So
motion.
your motion is calling for a vote within, not tonight, but within 4 weeks? That's your motion?
Yes, sir.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Do we have any discussion?
Yeah, so that would mean it would come back before us around June 18th, 20th, somewhere in there, and
What, today is
the
the
19th.
19th, so by
Somewhere
June
in there.
17th, say.
Uh-huh.
And it could be,
16,
it could be sooner. If we want to do it in 2 weeks, we could just move it along, get it done in 2 weeks. If staff has time to get this done and the city attorney has time to review it, we're available whenever we're available whenever you're available.
Rather than specifying 4 weeks, why don't we say the June meeting whenever you said it? I really don't think we're going to have time to do the city attorney review and circulate it in time for you to look at in just 2 weeks. And the meetings tend to be set when it's convenient for the board and when there's meeting space available.
Would you like to restate that motion?
I would restate the motion to the point of saying in the board's June meeting, rather than within 4 weeks.
Dale, do you
Yes,
still
I'll
second?
second that. Mhm.
Okay. I guess we're going to call for what we're then saying, my understanding is that we're not going to take action tonight. We're not going to move it forward. We're not going to recommend it. That is the motion to not recommend it. Allow staff, the attorney, and the building official time to do the cleanup, the clarification, and come up with a modified checklist.
That is the intent of my motion, sir.
Okay.
We won't have the checklist done in that short period.
Okay.
If,
I would be, as an aside to the motion, I would be satisfied to just say, okay, we're starting with this checklist, and in general, what changes would you make to it to adapt it to Ojai? that
We have a
staff is
motion.
not going to be in a position to bring that back to you in
Okay.
June.
You have a motion and you have a second.
We have a motion, we have a second. You want to call roll, or should I?
Board Member Quillisi,
Aye?
Board Member Ulrich,
Yes.
Board Member Hanson,
Yes.
Board Member Farmer,
No.
Chair Daddy.
I'll just abstain. I mean, it does, at this point in time, my vote doesn't count. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. It's 10 after 7. I would hope that we would have gotten way past this. So what I think we need to do is, I would really like us to focus and do a speed run. I don't know within the Brown Act what is permissible, but I would certainly hope that each and every one of you has some opportunity to take a look at the checklist, get your input, information, recommendations, talk to individual people, see what's going on. Let's get the best information we can. Let's give the staff the most help we can, and let's get it done very quick. Don't languish. Let's get it in. Let's make that a priority, and see what we can do to help move this thing along as quickly as possible. Get it back, have one more vote, get it to the council, and get this thing moved on. It's a real priority, I think.
So-
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Well, other cities and counties are having to do this as well. Are we all at the same starting point?
All cities and councils have got till September
I
13th.
understand, but some of
30th.
them may be ahead of us. We could see what they
Well,
did.
we may want to call up and take a look and see what some of
Yeah.
the cities are doing on our own. I don't want to overburden staff, so that's
No,
something
but that might make it
that we
easier.
need to take upon our own
Ourselves,
self.
yeah, okay.
It looks like we have discussion item 2. Mr. Stewart, would you like to start off and and give us any discussion, or
Yeah,
would you like me to just take Mr. Clark? Would you?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to make a few comments, and
Absolutely.
before Mr. Stewart makes whatever comments he wants to make. Um, Because staff resources are fairly limited, we've asked the city council to prioritize their goals and objectives under the leadership of the mayor. And in their recent review of various priorities, they ranked developing abatement plans for 2 properties on Ojai as being 12 out of 15, which is a very high ranking, something they'd like to get us on right away. On the other hand, addressing all vacant properties received a rating of 5 out of 15, which is a pretty low priority and something that probably would be deferred till a later time. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of staff time and effort is going to go into these abatement plans, and that there's a need for us to focus our efforts on those that are the highest priority. So I wanted to start out with that. Secondly, I think we have to be careful in the discussion that we not address specific properties because of due process considerations, but that I think it's okay to use properties as examples of what you'd like to see in an abatement program. And then thirdly, to me, the plain language of the ordinance is actually fairly clear as what we would want to see in abatement programs, with one exception, and that is what to do about fencing. The ordinance says that chain link fencing is not appropriate, but it doesn't really give us any guidance as to what is appropriate. And so one thing that I hope you'll have time to address during your conversation is what type of fencing you would like to see, especially for properties that are prominent commercial properties on Ojai Avenue. And those were my brief comments. Did you have anything further?
Yeah, available for questions.
Okay, I'm going to start it out with a question. And again, I don't want to vary, and I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure that most of the council doesn't even know this place exists. The old Forest Service building, which is next to Los Lagos, is, in my opinion, and correct me, is the only property in town that has a 6-foot fence on the sidewalk, the entire length. And so what I want to do is I want to go back to this other article I have in here about fencing. First of all, what's allowed? And I don't need to know that right now, but I want that for consideration. I didn't know that was an acceptable structure, because it is right there on the sidewalk. You go to Los Lagos, and it runs all the way down to where then you get into the optometrist and you get into the American Legion and all that stuff. That just kind of looks, I'm not really sure that we're looking for that kind of a community. And if we have that there, what we love to do in Ojai and go, I want that, well, that's not okay. But they want to use that as an example of what they want, and that was never okay. So I think we need to look at this. I, just by happenstance, happened to be looking at one yesterday. And there's a lot of other issues, and one of the other issues is the landscape too. So you've got the fencing in the landscape. So we need to figure out what's important with that, because if you have a 0 lot line barricade, and then I'm not really sure if we want that barricade down. So, no, this is going to be a council issue. I would think that 2 things happen, and I would think that it is more desirable to have a see-through fence for crime for a whole lot of other reasons than to have a fence that is a shield, is a blind.
Visually solid.
Visually solid, that so, you can't see what's going on back there. And you can't see the dead trees, the deterioration, the broken windows. We can go over there and I'll show you what's going on. It's not pretty. But if that fence came down, it would be horribly ugly. And what I would tell you was the 2 we're looking at, one of those would be off the list, and this one would definitely be on the list. Okay, and so I think enough said about that. So what I want to do is, do we have anybody in the audience that would like to have any discussion on item 2? Seeing none, Mr. Quillisi, would you like to start off with a discussion?
Thank you, sir. This is, I don't know, is it attachment B, I guess, to the staff report. I went through Section 9, Title 9, Chapter 15, and did a lot of proofreading and asked a bunch of questions and made comments as well. And attachment B, in terms of the proofreading part, are changes, adds, deletes. They are all marked. The adds are all underlined. The deletes are all strike-through text. But I did, and so we can go through those one by one if you like. Because I made by myself several recommendations of ways that we should be identifying and evaluating vacant buildings, for example, or in the monitoring program. One of the things that I think is a potential item that will save staff time is my recommendation in this markup that when the city identifies and evaluates a property as vacant, dangerous, or there's a third phrase in there, that a letter goes out and it states to the property owner where that property is failing to meet the provisions of the municipal code, but that an abatement plan be the responsibility of the property owner, not of city staff. And I recognize that's a great departure from where you are right now, but my feeling is that it should suffice for staff to notify the property owner that you are failing to meet the code in the following sections, and it is your responsibility within 30 days, 45 days, whatever time limit we might suggest, to provide back to the building department or the community development department, whatever phrase you want to use, an abatement plan that takes care of these failings, and that failure to do that is something that I should have added to my proposed addition to the city fee schedule. And I put fines as well as fees in there, but my feeling is that an abatement plan should be the responsibility of the property owner once properly notified of the failings to meet the municipal code provisions, and that there should be some teeth in that avoiding that responsibility to develop an abatement plan should carry some penalties. So, other than that, if you want to go through these things item by item, I think we'll all fall asleep with it. But I have my recommendations. As far as questions, I do on 9-15.02 definitions. The definition of building includes any real property being offered for sale, trade, transfer, or exchange as residential, whatever, and is whether or not is legally permitted and zoned for such use. I think that causes confusion. If there is a second unit and it's vacant, does that mean that the primary unit, if both are offered for sale, is now evaluated as vacant? The language says that to me, so I'm confused by that. Maybe that's the first one we can discuss.
Certainly it should not.
Right.
So
I agree.
I think that's a good comment for us to have the city attorney review the language and
Okay.
make sure that
That-
it addresses it that way.
I think that's the appropriate place to take it, but without that review, I'm not comfortable with that particular provision of 9-15 right now.
Yeah.
Second one is dangerous building. I suggested adding a copy of the International Code Council International Property Management Code, most recent edition, be maintained for public inspection at the City Hall, the Community Development Department, because a simple citation of dangerous building means any building or structure that is defined in there, doesn't mean anything, once again, to the general population. And this is back to the kind of question we had before. We need a municipal code that is clear enough that the average citizen can read it and understand what his or her responsibilities are. Third, we're still in definitions, 15.02. Days means consecutive calendar days. And yet some places we see 10 days or 5 days, other places we see 7 days or 14 days. I think we need to be consistent throughout this title and chapter, so that if we say 5 days, we mean 5 business days. If we say 7 days, we mean calendar days. But we can't use both unless 5 and 7 are really what we mean. I think they're not. I think when we say 7 days, we mean a week. I think when we say 5 days, we mean a week. In legally, the definition of legally occupied, it talks about legitimate and lawful business open to the general public on a day-to-day basis at least 5 days a week. I've walked up and down Ojai Avenue around the arcade, and I know there are legitimate businesses there that are open Tuesday and Friday from 11 to 3, or some such. And I would hate to have those businesses evaluated as vacant, but by the current language of the code, they are. So I think we need to change that. At least deleting the phrase "at least 5 days per week." Under definition of vacant, this is now on page 3 of the draft text amendment. Vacant, subparagraph 2, it says a multi-use occupancy structure, the unoccupied portion of a building where less than 65% of the total floor area is legally occupied. This puts every new building that is not fully leased out or nearly fully leased out before completed in jeopardy of being evaluated as vacant, which carries a lot of negative, not to eliminate financially painful consequences with it.
When I looked at this section, it seemed to me that it applied to a vacant unit within a multi-unit building. So maybe there needs to be some clarification as to that, but it may be, and I can't really think of an example of that right now, but potentially you could have a problem unit within an otherwise occupied building that you'd need to somehow address.
And I would agree that that's a possibility. The language right now, though, says for a multi-use occupancy building/structure where less than 65% of the total floor area within the building/structure is legally occupied. And so I think we need to change the language there to reflect that we're talking about unoccupied units within or something. But if I put up a commercial building and I start leasing it, and I'm 30% leased, when I get finished and Mr. Stewart says, okay, go ahead, and whoever else says, okay, you get a conditional use permit for the building, I'm immediately vacant, even though I'm 30% leased, and working like the Dickens to lease out the other 70%. So I think we need something in the definition of vacant that, yes, sir, Mr. Wyrick.
Thank you for mentioning that. Just mention another point when you say total floor area, that includes common area. So when you say total floor area, 65% of total floor area, many buildings will be 10, 20% common area, which means the effective vacancy is, that's a pretty high standard.
You don't have to empty much of the rest
Yeah,
to become a
exactly.
vacant
So I
building.
think that's an excellent point, because it's not unusual at all for 10, 20% to be common area of total floor area.
Yeah, at least on a periodic basis,
Right.
you could have that much empty, and okay.
I'm just talking
Enough
about
said.
stairwells and elevators and
And-
lobbies and,
All right, and Mr. Quillisi, we do have some large buildings changing hands, and there will be buildings repurposed, and therefore they will not meet the standard of occupancy.
And that's my point. I don't want people that, in the normal course of business, have ups and downs in their leasing, that that puts them in jeopardy of unfavorable evaluations by the city.
Okay.
Let me see, trustee, owner, trustee, beneficiary responsibilities. I'd like to see in here, and I've put in some language that says, but defines trustee, whoever holds the deed of trust. A beneficiary is whoever loaned the money to put the building up, is what I read. And I think if we notified beneficiaries at the same time, that would be a very effective way of making sure that owners and trustees actually accomplish what needs to be done under the code. Let me see. And I made some changes, 7s to 5s or 10s to 14s or whatever, by what I understood the intent of the original code sections. Over on section 9-15.07, B2, refers to Title IX, Chapter 1 of this code. Order vacant buildings which are open and accessible to be secured against unlawful entry pursuant to Title IX, Chapter 1 of this code. And I can't find any reference to secure or unlawful entry in Title IX, Chapter 1. So that's a reference that needs to be corrected. And I don't know what the correction is, or I'd have suggested something. In 9-1507B3, again, it refers to Title IX, Chapter 1, Article 5, and I can't find any reference to substandard or nuisance in that citation. Substandard appears in Title IX, Chapter 1, Article 4, but no definition is provided. It just said if it's substandard, but without saying what substandard means. So I think we need some clarifying language, and I personally don't know what to put in there. Okay, under 9-1507, it looks like there's no 9-15.08 missing. Anyway, 9-15.07G, as in golf, it says if the fee is not paid within 60 days or within 60 days after the decision of the director or the hearing officer. Who is the hearing officer? Is that Mr. Stewart, or does someone else hold hearings? That was a term that was not defined anywhere.
Yeah, I think. We're both thinking that that's an independent hearing officer that's appointed specifically to hear that kind of appeal.
Okay, then up in 15.02, we should have an appropriate definition of hearing officer.
And actually, there's a reference to that in another part of the code, which we should have, yeah.
Okay, good. Then that
Excuse
definition
me,
can just
but
refer to that other part of the
I don't think that's ever
code.
been done by this community.
Yes, it actually
Has
has.
it? Yeah, it has.
With the Chevrolet property on Montgomery, we've done that in the past.
Okay, and that when the hearing officer was appointed by whom?
I'm not sure who it was appointed by, but it was not.
The hearing officer is appointed by the city manager, but it's not a city employee. It's a independent person
An
from outside
independent
the city.
third party, yeah.
It's third party.
And that's fine. And I'm just saying, that was a term that appeared in 9-15, but it wasn't defined, and I didn't see a reference to anything that would define it. And I would ask that people who know that stuff put something in there to clarify. And what
Yeah.
Mr. Clark said, in effect, would satisfy me. So that, and you can see I've added language, 9-1509D, and 9-1512, and this is where abatement plan comes from. I suggest that the trustee or beneficiary of each vacant building within the city shall prepare, in response to the written findings by the director, a written abatement plan for that building for review by the CDD.
Can I ask you a
And
question?
I'm curious, how does anybody else feel about that?
Well, you're suggesting that the property owner, well, you're suggesting that we come up with what the property, any property should look like. Should be painted, it should be secured, the landscaping,
Those conditions are in the text, the current
Right.
text
yeah.
of the code.
And so then, in keeping with what we expect, they're going to come up with their abatement plan on how they're going to amend that, how they're going to
Right,
abate it.
yes.
And then after they come up with that abatement plan, then we're going to check on them every week to see that they're doing it in a timely fashion. We give them a deadline, or what do
There's timeframes built into the abatement plan.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
There ought
it's
to
a-
be.
It's a different approach than what we normally do in code enforcement. Normally, we identify what needs to be done, and we
Right.
direct a property owner to do it. In this case, I think what you're saying is that, for example, if the roof is leaking or something like that, I'm not even sure that's a good example, but we would require that the roof be repaired.
Right, or if there are weeds outside, like a lot of these
And I think,
buildings.
and I think what you're saying is that we would put them on notice that there's weeds outside and the roof is leaking, and ask them what they want to do about it.
And tell them that it's their responsibility under the code to produce an abatement plan that shows how they're going to remediate those conditions
In a timely fashion.
in a timely fashion. And if we don't have deadlines in the current text of the code for when the remediation that's in the abatement plan, or whatever is the proper word there, then we ought to have something in here that says they be given 30 days or 60 days or whatever it is, well, a short period to produce an abatement plan, and then a longer period, perhaps, to actually effect the abatement, and then penalties if they don't do that.
I'm having a little bit of trouble distinguishing between what you're recommending and what we have in the code right now.
Okay?
It seems like the notice that you're talking about is pretty similar to the abatement program that we're talking about. Typically, we would put someone on notice that certain items on their property or certain items within their building are out of compliance with the code and that they must be corrected. It sounds like you're saying put them on notice of the same thing and then to reply back as to how they're going to correct them. In the way we normally do it, that would automatically happen because they'd have to come back and, for example, they'd have to pull a building permit to replace the roof or to redo the roof. So I can't, just off the
Okay.
top of my head, it's a little bit hard to determine how different what you're recommending is from what we normally do, other than semantics.
Okay, I would agree with you that the notification is the same. But I thought what I saw in here in a draft abatement plan,
The way it's written, the building official, with the assistance of the city and attorney and other people, would basically impose an abatement program on the property owner, which says you shall do the following. Now, it could be somewhat general or very specific, depending on the circumstances. It would be different for every situation. But in the example of weeds, it could be to remove the weeds, or in the example of the roof, it could be to repair the roof. It could be either bring a building up to code or tear it down. So it's going to depend on the circumstances, but it's actually being dictated by the city based on this ordinance and possibly also based on the building code. So your approach is a little bit different. And I'm not really sure I totally understand how it would work, but like you're saying, the building is substandard, what do you intend to do about it? And then you give them an opportunity to come back and say, what do you intend to do about it?
yes, I think in general, that is my approach. And
Why do you think
as I
those-
look at the draft abatement plan here, it has some administrative stuff and the language, it's been determined by the CDD that the property is in violation. And then it says abatement plan for rehabilitation for occupancy, and then it's blank. Because that has to be created by city staff every time, is the implication to me. And that's the effort on the part of the city that I'm trying to eliminate. I don't think that that the city necessarily has to tell people how to rehabilitate the building. There are codes that say you can only do certain things or you must do other things and stuff like that already. And so I was trying to put forth the concept that you, the building owner, are failing to meet these things, and you must come up with a plan for fixing them. And to the extent that that plan requires permits, I agree, you have 90 days to get the permits and complete any and all remediation. I think,
The form you're making reference to is actually the form that was implemented with the current program. So this is actually the document with additions, of course, that go out
there may
under
be
the
additional
existing.
things under
And
evidence of
clearly-
vacancy,
and
for example.
clearly, that is the case. I think the concern that I'm understanding from the community in regards to this program, it really doesn't have enough teeth in it for an enforcement provisions. There's a building that we're going to be looking at another methodology to gain compliance that the city manager indicated actually had a notice that was given to him, and the result of that was not, I believe, satisfactory to the community as a whole of the improvements that they made. So I think what we're looking for, or at least the community is looking for, is provisions that are more of an enforcement component rather than a voluntary component of what meets that standard.
I would agree. And I think the language that's in this draft that says the owner has 90 days to obtain any necessary or required permits and complete the remediation, I think that's good. What we need to follow up with is something in the fee schedule that says if you fail to accomplish a remediation dictated by an abatement plan, whoever creates it, there's got to be some kind of ongoing, like a fine of X dollars a month if you fail to make these fixes. And it's got to be a big enough number that people are really motivated to do something. That's why I put together a proposed addition to the city fee schedule with some discussions with Mr. Ulrich, and I thank him for that.
Mr. Clark, let me butt
Yes,
in
sir.
for a minute. Mr. Clark, you and I talked about fee schedules, and just because I haven't talked about this. What I see happening is that we don't have a clear, concise, consistent process and procedure that just says you have so many days, you have so many days. We turn it over to the attorney. He takes them to court as quickly as he can, and we put the maximum fine. We've already done this. The mechanism worked well. And you just apply the maximum fine immediately for this reason. We're not asking them to do a whole lot of stuff. We have people that have got properties. Some of these properties have been there for 15 years, longer. And nobody's ever knocked on their door. Nothing's ever happened. There's never been any action. And so, it's going to come as a big jolt initially. But I think if you have a couple of big jolts, this will stop the other 13 or 14 or 15 that we've got that are eventually going to have to come. And what I would kind of like to see is here's what's going to happen. We're going to ask your cooperation. I do agree with Mr. Quillisi's. It's a process that I see is a do better program. It's like when somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to, you say, hey, what are you going to modify here? And how do you expect to go about? And how do you expect to comply rather than us stomping down on them and imposing? Ask them how they expect to do it. I think it would be up to staff to say, you know what, that's good, but you left out some of these things in your proposal to meet compliance, and those can be discussed and gone over and added. And then they understand that, hey, after 90 days, we're going to throw the kitchens. whatever that time frame is. We're going to throw the kitchen sink at you. What I would like us to stop totally, I think it is something that I'm most uncomfortable with that we do in the city, is work with people. There's no more working with people. What there is we've got an ordinance. It's clear. It's concise. It needs a fee schedule. They need to comply. They need to go ahead and get those signs up. They need to go ahead and get the property management up. They need to go ahead and they need to conform with registration. They need to conform with a weekly notice. And if that's going to be a huge burden on staff, I'd make a recommendation that we go ahead and we get an outside property management firm to go by and inspect every property every week. And the burden of the cost are going to be borne by the property owners for not complying. And then that way we don't have to spend time and we can move along. But I think where the frustration is, hey, you got to clean this place up, and nothing happens, and they just ignore it, and nothing happens, and they ignore it. And what happens is nothing happens becomes the norm. You know, it's kind of like that ingress and egress. Somebody's been trespassing on your property and using your road for so many years they think it's theirs. And I think we have a number of people that think that they're literally exempt. And so what my thought would be that we move people into court and we move it away from the building department as quickly as possible. We move it to the city attorney as quickly as possible. And as you and I discussed, I'm not sure what currently is the fine structure, what's allowed. And I would hope that would be revisited with the city attorney and that be, we recommend to the council that it be appropriate in these $100 fines and $50 fines, and those fines are going to be irrelevant. I think that the fines need to be fairly staggering. I've seen where we have threatened homeowners with $1,000 a day fine because that's in our statutes, but I don't know what the maximum fine on a property is. And I don't know how far we can go, but I would like us to explore that. And I'd like us to send a letter to them and just say, listen, we are going to go through this process and give them the step-by-step of what we're going to do and when we're going to trigger it and how many days they have so they get it. And then we just take them into court and we turn it over to the legal department, and the building department goes on their way and takes care of the community and does those things where we need them. And I understand they're overburdened. And I don't want them to get bogged down into this thing because I see this as a long contracted stalemate. It has been. I believe it will be for a while. And I think that's what our attorney is best suited to do. Anyhow, that's my 2 cents. And I would like your input as to where we can't do those things, or where do you see stumbling blocks as to doing that? Because I think the temperament of the city is enough.
So I think there are a number of different tools in the tool shed, and really the trick is working with the city attorney to find the right one that applies to each situation. Issuing administrative citations, which is where you have a fine involved, those are small fines and they're not very effective when you're talking about big changes. Issuing compliance orders can carry bigger fines, but those fines have to be imposed by a hearing officer similar to the one we discussed, which is someone that we don't control. And then when you prosecute and go through the court system with misdemeanors and felonies or other types of actions, what is imposed is up to the judge. And so in some cases you have more control, in some places you have less control.
These are civil court transactions, not criminal, correct?
For an infraction,
Could be criminal.
for an infraction or a misdemeanor, there's a schedule of
Demeanor's a criminal
fines.
term, yeah, okay.
There's a schedule of fines, but the actual fine is imposed by the court. But yeah, there could be other types of legal proceedings. So what I've been discussing with the city attorney and what we suggested to the city council is that we focus on a couple of prominent cases and try and come up with the best program that gets those cleared up. And so that could involve making changes to this particular ordinance and using this particular ordinance. It could be using other administration of code compliance types of things from Title IX of the municipal code. And it could involve different kinds of enforcement actions, each suited to the individual situations. So what we're going to attempt to do is come up with a game plan for each property.
Okay, and my goal in marking up 9-15 and providing you with the puts and takes and all of that was to provide a code basis for a plan to bring people into compliance.
Yeah, and that's very helpful in that regard.
And that includes fees and fines. I looked through the city fee schedule. I didn't know where to look to find a city fine schedule if there is such an independent object. So I put fees and fines in the same table here as a suggested addition to the fee schedule. But I don't know, where is that stuff now? Are there established, approved by some prior city council, fees and fines for these infractions, you call them?
So there are fines that are set in the municipal code for a variety of different violations. And again, those can be, those are imposed by the court if someone is cited in that
Oh, so the
fashion.
city can't simply say, you didn't do this, therefore it costs you?
There is, in addition to that, there is an administrative citation process. And for an administrative citation process, we do have some fees that are adopted, and there's probably other fees that we need to adopt for an administrative citation. Then there's a whole nother category, which is a fee for a service, which I think is something you're talking about too. For example, if we have an outside agent who's monitoring compliance with an abatement plan, we could, I believe, adopt a fee based on the cost of that to pass the cost on to the property owner. So
Yes.
So
yeah.
I think the point you're making is that these penalties have to have teeth or they won't be effective.
Yes,
Well-
and so I said, if the city has to contract with a property management company for monitoring and reporting on a vacant building or its abatement or whatever, $250 plus the cost of the contract. And that cost be borne by the property owner.
One of the things that's happening now is the city is bearing all the costs for this. And I think, and the city's gonna lose the time of staff. And I think that needs to be directed to where the problem is. And I do believe we need to go with an outside agency and just say, this is the cost, these are the administrative fines, these are the other fines. And for the point of our discussion tonight, what, if anything, can we recommend or do or forward? I would like Mr. Quillisi to make copies of all of his remarks and recommendations and markups and get them to city staff so they
Okay.
can take a
Well,
look at those
I-
things.
What you have in your package here is what I provided city staff. I did hand Mark an additional fine for failure to accomplish remediation dictated by an abatement plan of $500 a month. Maybe that's still not enough. Maybe, I think $1,000 a day is going to get big property owners' attention, and it's going to crush small property owners.
So in response to Chair Daddy's question, I think the next step is for us to take these recommendations forward to the city attorney and get his input on them and then bring them back to you.
Okay.
Okay, do we have any other business, any other comments? Anybody want to make a statement?
We're still continuing at the end of.
Well, I kind of thought that was
That's the end of my comments. I wasn't suggesting that we cover or discuss every put and
Okay,
take,
well,
but.
I have one that I.
Great.
One observation regarding 915.2 1-2 abatement plan. It occurs, this issue occurs elsewhere, and I just kind of tracked it through the municipal code, and it appears to have its genesis as a consequence of back in the day, most of these determinations regarding any or all requirements of an ordinance, or in this case, an abatement plan section of the ordinance, would be appealable to a body, and the body in this instance is the Planning Commission.
Oh,
This
I thought
is,
the appeal would come
this
to
is,
us.
No, 915, well, that's what I'm saying, its genesis occurred prior to the existence of a building appeals board.
Right.
But our city ordinance, and the one we're looking at here before us, section 915.12 abatement plan, subsection D, an owner or, and this is as modified draft text
Oh, it does say
amendment.
to the Planning Commission.
Okay, now, so I've looked back at what Article 30 of this code provides, and basically it's that there's some appeal body that's identified. But this is not Title 10, this is not a zoning ordinance issue. So I think from a practical perspective, that not only is confusing, it's not effective. It also talk about scarce use, use of scarce resources insofar as staff time. For an appeal to the Planning Commission is going to involve a heck of a lot more preparation, just numerosity. This doesn't make sense to me. So,
I think.
and even though it was modified and amended from 15 to 21 days from receipt or deemed receipt thereof, I think this is a substantial element that needs to get either revised.
And I
or-
apologize for not having traced that reference back to the original text. I should have done
Well,
that.
the purpose of the article is to provide procedures for filing of appeals of the determinations by the department, staff, or director, or the decisions, which are different than determinations, of the director or commission. This is related to zoning matters. And I'm just looking at how our Ojai Municipal Code was formulated, and it appears that there was a lot of what I'd characterize as cut and paste in some of these ordinance sections, and they have not withstood the scrutiny of any kind of review that has occurred on a scrupulous basis or on any basis that would have surfaced this sort of what I characterize as a patent conflict, or perhaps not better stated.
Perhaps this citation has just been overcome by events, one of those being formation
But
of this board.
it's being carried forward.
Yeah.
And that's and we're looking at an amended recommendation that incorporates it. It's not a good thing. So, from that perspective, I would submit that is either redrafted or deleted for, and addressed elsewhere, perhaps. I don't know.
And I would be happy to take on,
Well, it's not a zoning ordinance matter,
Right.
okay? So, yeah.
So that's what you
Yeah,
suggested.
I'm saying it should, it's related to building and
Right.
potentially housing matters,
Right.
not zoning matters.
Okay.
So,
And it appears that was written long enough ago.
no, 2010, or at least when it was as
Well,
amended.
prior to the establishment of this board.
Right.
Right. So there was no alternative to a Title X issue.
That explains
And it-
why it was then, that doesn't explain why it's here now. Okay, that's all I'm
So the
saying.
recommendation is to change that to a Title IX.
Well, how about if we just, if we change in 9-15.12 D Delta, second line, change Planning Commission to Building Appeals Board, and then delete all the text after thereof. Would that work for you?
Yeah.
I think that's the appropriate place for an appeal of an abatement plan to go, is here.
I think the city attorney would have to weigh in on that a little bit, but we could
All
throw
of
that
this,
as a
I think,
recommendation.
is subject to city attorney review.
Yeah, we'd just like them to look into it. Mr. Ulrich, anything,
Would-
any other points?
Not at this time, but however, I would say from an overarching perspective, if the, are you telling me the city attorney hasn't looked at this yet?
Just got them.
The city attorney's taken a preliminary look at it, but he hasn't looked at these particular recommendations, no.
Okay,
Doesn't seem-
all right, but he's taken a preliminary look, though, at the ordinance
At the-
as previous to its amended condition.
Correct.
Okay, so he apparently thought it was fine the first time he looked at it, unless there's some reservations that were not expressed?
So he hasn't made specific recommendations yet, so that's in process.
Well, I'd like it to be reviewed within that, the perspective of continuity or consistency with changes that have occurred in Ojai's governance.
Well, I
And-
assume
and-
that's the reason it's come back to us to look at it and to make recommendations, and then you'll take it to the city, you know. I mean, I would have to
Attorney.
think that we would put the trust in staff to come up with something that's beneficial and to put this through.
And it's enforceable
Yeah.
and useful.
Yeah, there's you know, Chair Daddy in the beginning had mentioned something about the fence situation. I really think it's important to continue with chain link fencing, because I think once you block it in, for instance, a couple of properties that we have on Ojai Avenue, blocking those in, I think would just increase the chance of vandalism but I do think that council has obviously prioritized this because of the, complaints from the citizens. Sure. So, I have to commend you and Steve for putting this together and working with the city council. But I would think that our recommendations obviously would go to the city attorney and for any reviews.
Mr. Farmer, anything else? Can I, just for consideration? You might want to target a third property, because that is the one with the fence. And if and when that fence comes down, we're going to see something extremely ugly there. I would urge you to take a look, go around the side, you can go, it's pretty feasible. It is going to be one of these buildings where we have the definition of blighted. We have the broken windows, we have the weeds, we've got the abandoned vehicles. All the stuff that is the definition of blighted is there. Not vacant, but blighted and vandalized. And so,
That
just.
comes into dangerous and substandard and stuff like that, which are separately defined. in here.
That one will be the poster child above the other two, by the way. So
Yeah,
I would
and-
hope we figure that out. And again, I would hope somebody would let us know what, and this is not for us, I know this is Title 10, I know this is zoning. What does this zoning say
Uh-huh.
about putting a fence right on the sidewalk, a barricade 6 feet high in
Says
the
no.
frontage of the property all the way down? And I don't need to know the answer,
Yeah.
somebody needs to look at that and figure out what that says. We may not have a rule for commercial that addresses that. Do you know what that is, Mr. Stewart? And I don't want to put you, and you can say no, and we'll just move on.
And I'm going to say no
Get this
because
thing closed.
because I've been thinking about it since you brought it up, and there's several things going on in the mind that I have to check out to see what the real situation is.
appreciate
So I'll
that.
hold off any comments on that.
Dale, do you have a closing remark or an item or a concern or
Yeah,
something?
I
that-
just want to see the blighted properties. And to me, just because a property's vacant doesn't necessarily mean if the landlord is keeping it up and actively trying to fill it. I don't care about it being vacant so much, but that it's looks nice for the city. This is a tourist city. We want people driving through here and saying, oh, what a nice town, and wanting to come back. And So I would just like to see the word blighted rather than vacant, although vacant can have its own meanings. But drive down Ojai Avenue, there's so many weeds, and you know, we need to clean it up, and whatever it takes. Maybe we can start with those 3 properties.
And
Weeds on an empty lot, though, you
Yeah, but
can
even
have a
that.
blighted empty lot?
Yes.
Because this right now talks about building.
I mean, but I mean blighted properties. I mean, I realize this is
With, one of the things
vacant
I would
buildings.
ask that you would consider doing, I think blighted properties and dangerous properties and hazardous properties are those properties where we have 100-foot dead pine trees that are giant, ready to come over. We have some of those things. And I would think that that would be an urgency item. We're 4 years in a drought. We have extremely dry. We have a lot of dead things. We have a lot of people that are reticent to move any of this stuff. And I would think that we need something where we cut all the dead trees down out of the street easement. We went and we did all that stuff. The city did a fantastic job of that. But now when we have one 5 feet back and it's this monster that's going to burn and explode, we need to find some type of way.
Or fall over and hurt someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to find some type of way to include this where the city has control and we don't have to be dependent upon any other outside agencies to help us with enforcement. We need to have that absolute enforcement period. We have some very dangerous conditions. And these are conditions that are simple. And what we would do is we'd use the average person test. If the average person could determine this is a heck of a hazard, that's a pretty simple bar for us to go over. And it is now 8 o'clock. And do we have any other items that need to be discussed? Do we have anything from staff or anything from the board that we need to get into?
From my point of view, there's a lot of detail in here that needs to be resolved at some point. But there is a major conceptual item that I'm not sure that all of us are in agreement on right now, and that's 915.12 abatement plans. I recognize that much of what I suggested, and in fact even some of the timeframes that are in there, are in this draft abatement plan. I would ask that if there are going to be checked items under evidence of vacancy, that clearly there could be more than that, and I would ask that each one be accompanied by a specific citation to the Ojai Municipal Code. One of the things that concerns me is that people see that, but they don't know, is this the opinion of some official? Is this embodied in local law someplace that I have to do this? And it should be the latter, and it should be clear to people that it's the latter so that they know it's something that has to be complied with. And secondly, who does the abatement plan? Because it still looks to me like there's a big blank section in here, abatement plan, plan for rehabilitation, and then the next words are the owner of the subject property has 90 days. So there's no dictated action there. And it was that effort of dictating action, not why, but how something's to be accomplished, that I felt might be taking too much staff time.
Well, I understand that comment, and I think we'll discuss that with the city attorney.
Okay?
The way it's written right now, it actually is staff that would prescribe what the abatement plan is, and that's the process we're normally used to. But I think your idea is worthy of discussion with the city attorney, so.
Okay, so we kind of put 15.12 on the back burner for the moment and review that with the city attorney before we all vote on what do we recommend to the city council. Well, I guess that's true of all of it, really.
Well, I'd like to point out that in looking at any modification of an ordinance, or as as an extension or as an ultimate policy initiative of the council. I think part of the intent of the process should be to recognize and to implement that whatever the work product, whatever it flows from our recommendations, is something that is easily or as easily as possible implementable. When you set up a rather complex system as this structure is, as the second unit compliance program, et cetera, if it's contingent upon overburdened staff resources, for in this case, to generate an abatement plan that is site-specific, which is labor and time intensive, it's not going to happen. So the question is, how do you make it so that it's fairly feasible to execute? And is that, for example, I'll just make an off-the-wall suggestion, that whereas there is inherent in this program the capacity to hire an outside property management firm, the same firm would be doing monitoring and reporting, that same firm can generate an abatement plan. And it doesn't involve staff. Staff obviously can review it before it gets incorporated into the process.
That's a lot less effort.
It's a lot less effort. There's a dollar amount, that's quantifiable that could be attached to that, and that becomes yet another cost. And as far as this, how enforcement thing, I heard three reasons why most processes from an enforceability wouldn't happen. One, the hearing officer implementation. Two, the civil or criminal potential fine as being imposed by a court. And three was it is administrative action that is done by the city. The reality of the situation is, if someone's in violation of city ordinance and it winds up going to a judge, that's for the trier of fact is simply, were they in violation or not? The issue from a hearing officer is essentially the same thing. There may be mitigating circumstances, of course, and from an administrative perspective, essentially you're doing the same thing. Someone is making a decision or a determination. But the idea is not to have it either inefficient or incomplete, such that it's not effective. It cannot be implemented. And that's, everything here has that potentiality unless it is stripped down to its bare elements.
And I might add, Mr. Clark, if there's anything in point 8 that was missing from the packet, or I would urge the board members here to go ahead and look up point 8 on your own, unless somebody wants to send it out in an email. We can look at it, and if there's anything in point 8 that needs discussion, I would urge you to read that and get that right back, because we go from 7 to 9. We missed 8 in the packet. We didn't have that, so.
Dash
we can't,
15.08, yeah.
unless there is no 8, but
I don't believe there's an 8. We
well,
looked into it.
we don't have an 8, but the city may have an 8. We just haven't seen it.
I haven't seen
And
it.
so, so I would like to know that. And then I'm about to close this. My main focus is that if we write all these reports, we run around, we do all these things, we spend all this time, we do all this observation, I don't see where we have a clear, concise, easy way for cost recovery. We could spend a ton of time. We have a lot of people that have needs, and we're taking away our resources for our community that has needs. When we take a look at this giant building with the Louisiana owner, or we take a look at this other giant building with the Simi Valley owner, or we take a look at this other building with the San Luis Obispo County owner, and if you want me to give you the other 12, I'll do that too. And I personally know 2 of them very, very, very well. I've known one of them for 35 years. I want the staff to not be overburdened, and I want the staff to have adequacy, and I want the community to have availability. And that's the reason I think you go do this, it comes in on time, it's every time, they look at it every week, you get the reports every week. And then we can go back and say, Your Honor, you know, we did our part, we were systematic, it was all done, here's the documentation, here's the expenses, you know, here's where we're going. The people wrote up their plan or no plan and said they do this and they failed. And I think what happens is they're not going to do it. I mean, I'm sorry to say that. I'm sorry to say that, but this August 1st, I will have been here for 20 years. A bunch of these things have been vacant since
Since you got here.
before I got here, and that's that's the only mark I have. So I'm going to, unless I have an objection, or I have any input from Mr. Clark or Mr. Stewart or Mr. Wyrick, I'm going to go ahead and gavel this shut if I don't have an objection. And then what I would hope is that all of the information that we have, we copy and forward to staff, and that we, as soon as possible, you can look at two things. One is what the other cities are doing if you have an interest. And number two, look at number 8 as it comes in and see if there's anything that's important that we need to take
Number
time
8
out.
is missing in the
Correct.
staff version
Right, but
of the
we're gonna,
ordinance
but
as
we're
well.
gonna get that version. With that, meeting's closed.
Thank you.